Hello everybody, Mike, aka The Magico13, here with episode 30 of the Out of This World series. If you remember last time, we had just finished circularization around the moon. We are now headed out to Laythe. We have a maneuver planned, and we are basically just doing the burn, getting the yellow or green orbit to match the projected blue one. We will actually be doing two things today. We'll be doing Laythe and Minmus, which basically concludes the Joolian 4 Grand Tour. Because Kerbal doesn't really count. So Laythe and Minmus will be this one, and the return will be the next one. Thought I had something else to say, and I can't remember what it was quite now. As you can see, we're getting our Laythe periapsis. Now, getting one that's well within the atmosphere, we're going to be doing an aero braking, pulling away from the moon at high time warp, and coming into Laythe. So you can see Laythe is here. I want to say, yeah, Kerbal is probably the other one, and the little dot, yep, it is in fact. The little dot that you saw there was BOP, thanks to the Distant Objects Enhancement mod. Very nice little mod, makes things that are far away actually visible, like planets and stuff. I have actually witnessed some satellites in Kerbal orbit during sunrise and sunset. You can see them kind of sparkling in the sky, and it's pretty sweet. Makes it a lot more realistic. So yeah, we were basically doing our aero braking. We've pretty much finished it by this point. I didn't really want you guys to have to watch the whole thing. You can see Jool peeking up behind the clouds of Laythe. Actually, there's not too many clouds there. I think that's mostly just the water texture that's repeated way too often. It looks kind of bad, actually, having that texture repeated that much, but unfortunately on Laythe there is quite a lot of water, and not a lot of land. You will notice we are using the normal Laythe, not the one that typically comes with Alternis Kerbol. As I've explained in the past, I had to remove those changes because otherwise it was completely impossible to use it. But we are raising our periapsis up out of the atmosphere and doing a plane change. The purpose of that is so that we can map all around the equator. I could do a full plane change to go into a polar orbit, but the reason I decided not to is because I don't want to waste all of our fuel. Although landing on Laythe with less fuel is preferable, but I don't want to waste all of it because there is a chance we won't find a Kethane deposit that overlaps with the land. And I don't want to do a water landing. I absolutely refuse to do a water landing. Part of that is because the Kethane miner has to actually break the ground, not the water. And we can't really do that with this. So I'm just going to be doing a scan of the equator, and you can see it here. It's just a kind of thin swatch of land that's mapped out. Most of it is also mapped for Kethane. Unfortunately, there's only 2 Kethane deposits visible there, and both of them are in the water. So it looks like we are not going to be able to land on Laythe, which is really disappointing. I brought parachutes along for it. I brought a barometric pressure sensor thing entirely for Laythe, and we're gonna have to leave. So the next up is Minmus, and that transfer is occurring in about an hour, but we've got a node set up for about a half hour from now that will get us into a polar orbit around Minmus. And if we come in polar, then we don't need to do a plane change, and we can do full mapping of the entire moon. So we do that burn, get in close, there we go, get a periapsis of 30 kilometers, and let's leave it at that. Time warp up, and we are now approaching the sphere of influence change. There we are. It says Laythe to Jool. That's because the sphere of influence change out of Laythe messed up, and the alarm apparently didn't realize that, even though it recalculated the new sphere of influence change. So that's kind of a bug, but it's not a serious bug. We've got 1600 meters per second of delta V, and this is going to be about a 650 meter per second burn to get a nice circular polar orbit around Minmus. We are going to just execute that burn. You'll notice our orbit speed is only like 600, and we're doing a around 600 meter per second burn. Yeah, our orbital speed is going to be nothing. It's currently 63 meters per second. I believe Alternis Kerbol, the Minmus in Alternis Kerbol, has a smaller size and a smaller gravity than the one in the stock game. You will notice it is red, and it is not the normal mint green colored, and you'll also notice the map is a little different. This is a biome map of Minmus. There are the midlands and the lowlands and the flats and the lesser flats and the greater flats and the great flats, and there's a lot of different flats. Those do exist, but I don't think they're quite the same as the stock one. This, however, we can land wherever we want pretty much, and no problems there. So we are going to land on this Kethane deposit that's kind of near the poles. The reason for this is because, well, one, it's on our orbit, for the most part. Very small plane change required, I think. And two, it's got a lot of Kethane. Kethane's always good. We need that in order to refuel, since we've only got a kilometer per second of delta V. And it's also got like 3 biomes near it. It's got the midlands, the slopes, and the lowlands. So we can do all of those really quickly without having to expend much in the way of fuel. You'll notice our low fuel light is on because we've got less than a kilometer per second. So we've got less than a quarter of our fuel. However, with Minmus's low gravity, it really won't be a concern. However, I do really want to refuel before I go jumping around. I don't want another repeat of what happened on the moon, where I had like 50 meters per second and was hoping to land on the Kethane deposit in the twin craters. And you'll notice we are pretty much right on the edge of this, and you can see the very beautiful blue jewel that the Alternis Kerbol system has. If you use Alternis and you use the default clouds, you will want to remove the clouds for Jool. Otherwise, it will be green, but also flickering, which is kind of annoying. So I had to do that. I just removed the pictures, and I think there's a config setting that you can remove in one of the configs. I don't actually remember, so hopefully I don't need to redo that anytime soon. One annoying thing about low gravity worlds is when you hit the ground and bounce up a little bit, the low altitude warning siren thing goes off a bunch of times. So we are on the midlands. The slopes are fairly nearby, and I also know that there are some lowlands, though I have mentioned that before. So we're just going to basically do the same thing that we did with the moon, and just basically get all of these temperature scans too. If I can find the thing. No, Mike, it's higher. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I should have probably put that closer to the hatch, but oh well. I also can never seem to land it so that that side is lit up. It is always the other side. We also will be getting 40 science from the radar scan and the multispectral scan, so that's 80 total, which is kind of nice. You can see Laythe there in the distance. There's the moon back there, and Jool, and we are on Minmus. The only one we are missing is Kerbin, and Pole, which could be one of those things in the background. It might be the smaller one. I don't actually know. I didn't think to check. From this distance, Pole is pretty much only going to be visible with the distant object enhancements. I don't think we'll actually see it nicely rendered like before. I will skip the getting the science out of the things. I happen to show for this time taking all of the science. Later ones will have later landings will have progressively less and less repeated. The flag text is, I think, the only thing I keep every time. So this is Jool 4 Landing 17 Minmus 1, the Midlands. Definitely doesn't look like mint ice cream. Maxim Kerman. Yes, like I was saying before, this Minmus is reddish-brown and is potentially smaller. You'll notice our jump is very high. It's taller than the entire Jool 4 all-in-one spacecraft, which has a ridiculously long shadow right now, with the sun, kind of reddish sun rising. I was checking to see if I could figure out my altitude over ground. Unfortunately, I can't. I mean, all I'd have to do is check what the altitude when I was on the ground was and just subtract the two, but I didn't end up doing that, and I didn't think to do it just now either. So I don't actually know how high of a jump that was, but it was, my guess is like 50 meters. So we've already got 108 data in here, which is very, very likely several thousand science. So I'm very excited for when we bring that home. And that's before even doing all of the different Minmus biomes. And you may have noticed Minmus nets us quite a bit. So we are just still refueling. We're filling up the oxidizer now and running out of electric charge. So in order to weather this nighttime, we need to turn off the Kethane miner and hope that we don't accidentally kill everyone. We had a bit of an eclipse with Laythe. You may have noticed that. If not, you can rewind and watch that section of the footage again. You'll see the electric charge actually dip down and then back up, and that was because Laythe eclipsed the sun. It also had a bit of a brightness change. You may have noticed that. But now it is actual sunrise, because we had like a fake sunrise earlier, which was enough to refuel our electric charge, but not quite enough to run the Kethane miner. But we are running it once again, filling up our oxidizer, time warping up, and once that is full, we will be headed up to... Actually, we're going to the poles. Not yet. We still have to do the Midlands we have done. We need the slopes and the lowlands all visible here. I will eventually right-click, and you can see right on the edge is where we are. So this is Midlands, that's lowlands, this is slopes, there's more lowlands down there, and those should be easy to get to, and then we will head to the poles, and then we will jump around and do all of the flats. The greater flats, the great flats, the lesser flats, the flats, and I want to say there might be another one. So you can see here, this is Minmus. It's really hard to tell where canyons are and where it's just kind of the curve because it's so small. So I think the lowlands are just kind of down the hill. But honestly, the altitude might be higher, like just because, yeah, the curvature makes it very confusing. So we're just going to head east. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'll show you this landing and perhaps part of the next one. I mean, landings are pretty simple. We've got a thrust-to-weight ratio of 3, and that's like with an 8%, 7% thrust. And that's with the tanks completely fuel. You'll notice we didn't use like anything in terms of fuel for that. And that is why I like Minmus. It requires nothing in terms of fuel. We could do this entire thing on a single fuel of tank. A single tank of fuel. Yeah, so crew reports net you 25 science. The surface samples are like 150 as opposed to the moon's 90. So Minmus is going to net us quite a bit. You'll notice we're only 150 meters away from the last spot. This is slopes. Well, we certainly didn't have to go far, Ethan Kerman says. And you'll notice Laythe is back up there. That means we have gone through, I think, 2 orbits. Minmus, for every one orbit of Laythe, Minmus goes through 2. There's a 1 to 2 to 4 ratio of Minmus. Well, I should say Moon Laythe Minmus, I do believe. I think Kerbin might be in that resonance, but I know for sure that Minmus, Laythe, and Moon are in a resonance. And so when Moon makes 1 orbit, Laythe has made 2, and Minmus has made 4. That's basically what it means. So Laythe will actually appear in that part of the sky very often, every other sunrise, essentially. So if we go through one day, the next time the sun is where it's at now, there won't be Laythe there, but then another day and Laythe will be exactly there again. And you'll actually, I think, notice that later on in the video. But for now, we are headed to the poles. For most of these, I will show the EVA report and then plant the flag. Some of them, I think I just show the flag because I tell you what biome it is in the name of the flag. So this is landing 20, Minmus 4, poles. And I'm out of witty comments, it appears. Not that they were ever that witty in the first place. You can see, I think, Moon there, maybe pole. I also decided to throw this footage in. It just kind of seemed kind of cool to look at Minmus from the South Pole with Jool in the background. So the flickering that is going on is because this is actually 3 meters below sea level. And if the camera goes below sea level, it just goes black. This is the Great Flats. These flats are more than good, they're great, and apparently below sea level. And this would be Maxim Kerman doing this one, Ethan Kerman at the next one with a very large Jool there. This is sped up a little bit. This is the lesser flats. They may call these flats lesser, but the view of Jool is remarkable. And I agree, that view of Jool was very nice, and I might put it in the photo album. This also has a pretty cool view of Jool. And then we go to the Highlands, and it's very dark right now because the sun is just kind of set. There's an anomaly very nearby to where we are, and I really want to go check it out. And it takes me a little while and a game crash, but I eventually find it. It is a monolith. If you have not seen one of these in KSP, they are scattered around the universe, or solar system, I should say, because there's not really more than just the solar system. There is one actually near the runway. I will spoil that for you. So if you ever want to see a monolith for yourself, and you're not running Alternis Kerbol, I think that one's probably still there too. But even in the stock game, these exist, and there is one near the runway, and there are a bunch more hidden on Kerbin. They are visible on maps. If you use the multispectral scanner, you will find these anomalies, but they aren't marked. You'll notice there's kind of a weird, kind of ringy looking thing up there. That is Laythe, and behind it is the sun. We are currently completely eclipsed by Laythe once again. This one's not sped up super fast, so this one we will actually have to sit here and witness, and it's frankly pretty sweet. I didn't notice it at the time when I was writing this, but now I'm kind of starting to notice it. You can see the sun just starting to peek out, and then once it gets most of the way through, eventually... yeah, I'm taking a picture now. There we are. There is the full brightness of the sun, no longer fully eclipsed by Laythe. Pretty sweet. There we got Kerbin behind us, and we've got Jool in front. So this is the last stop on Minmus. I've gotten all of the biomes, I believe, with the science instruments that we have. We are unfortunately missing 2 of them. We do not have the seismic scan or the other one, the gravioli detector. We will probably have them when we are done with this. But now is a good time for a group photo on Minmus, the very last stop of the Joolian 4 mission, save for one, and that would be Kerbin. So after this, we are taking off and heading to Kerbin, but that will be in the next episode. for now, I have to put these people back in. So first off is Tomfred Kerman. He originally flew the Jool all-in-one ship up from Kerbin's surface to orbit, and he will actually be flying it back home. Next up is Maxim Kerman. He, I believe, is the one who planted the flag. He is going into the science module. We are doing a bit of a switch up because the other guys really haven't gotten to do anything except sit in the science module, and that one time they got to look at a UFO. So Ethan Kerman will be headed into the science module as well. He has done most of the flying. I believe he's done all of the Minmus flying, all of the Laythe flying, and about half of the Moon flying. So Maxim, sorry you didn't get to do quite as much in terms of flying around, but I promise you will get to do something soon. You wanted to go to Eve, I do believe, and, well, Eve might be our next target. I do show later on a little bit the transfer windows that are coming up, and if I recall correctly, there's a 14 days there is a transfer to from Kerbin to Eve, and we're going to try to make that window, but first we have to get this thing home and get the science from it, and first we need to refuel, but we have run out of electric charge, and it is currently nighttime. And so I will have to wait for daytime again, but looking at this, it's going to be a while. We're still on the light side of Jool. When sun theoretically would come out, we would be on the dark side of Jool, so it's going to be a very, very long night. And without electricity, you never know what could happen. Like, maybe, perhaps, everyone will run out of oxygen, because you need the electricity to run the air filters. And in fact, that is what happens. So you guys will have to see what happens next time. Until then, I'm Mike, aka VMagico13. Thank you all for watching.